porker. Boy.
Thanks a bunch, Professor.
We'd want a history of this toilet.
Now, I know many of you might be completely baffled when you just take a look at the title of this video. So, first of all, I just want to say that I just recently finished reading one of Stephen King's novel, It. And to be honest, I completely felt really unenjoyable with this book. But still, that doesn't mean that I fully hate it a lot. And I in no way dislike it. I actually love this book. But out of every book in the series by Stephen King, even though I never read any of those, I pretty much enjoy this one the least. And I feel like I have to say that it's okay if you disagree with me. Everyone has their own opinion, and many people view these books differently. On top of that, however, I feel like I have no idea what to say, but I just get stuck on it on a very few occasions. I did plan myself on when I will be able to read it, and by the time I did, I just felt sort of dragged out and pretty much tired. Now, I know this is only a book review, but I'll try my best to add a few clips from the movies just so I won't get any copyright information. But I will only use a few of those, and I might use some differences between the miniseries and the two remakes. So let's get started. So as I said, I don't dislike this book. I actually like it a lot, but I'm not here to talk about why this book is good. I'm here to talk about the flaws I see in it. And even so, this has become without a doubt based on every book that I've read, especially with some other ones that I've read. But this one always leaves me wanting to stop reading or listening to the audiobooks and give up, never really knowing what's going to happen. I think the reason why this book is the least enjoyed might be one of the pacings. I feel like the first two chapters, after the flood and after the festival, could have easily just been moved very differently, especially when looking at the very first chapter of the book, and then going on by scrolling more within the life of the Losers Club. And when we do get to the second one, it pretty much felt confusing when it starts off with the adulthood. I feel like the book could have started very easily like the same thing like the movies did, with just the losers enjoying their summer and then getting haunted by Pennywise, and then to the adulthood in part 2. In the book though, after Georgie meets Pennywise and eventually gets killed by him, we then get to the second chapter where Adrian and Dawn started dating and then eventually getting beaten up real badly by the boys and then leading to Adrian's death. And after Adrian's death, we then get to the part where Dawn tells everything to the cops about what had happened. And then we get to the third chapter where we do start the adulthood life, where Mike calls all the 7 losers. This to me feels a little bit off because the book literally starts back and forth with every directions. First getting into the younger kids, and then getting into the adult, and repeats over and over again. There's just so many stuff that's been going on with this book that pretty much felt really dragged out of everyone's excitement. And after every chapter ends with each part, it then gets to each interludes within each chapters, telling what they've gone over so far. Me personally, if they only cut down the interludes, it would have made this book much more less fat and bulkier and would probably have less than 1,000 pages. There's just so many things in this book that has super long chapters that pretty much feel unnecessary. Not only that, this book contains a whole lot of violence and lots of other bad things, including so many swearings. And if you look at the film adaptations of It, specifically the It miniseries, which is arguably my favorite Stephen King movie, it's pretty much like the book, but pretty much vastly different. And the director for this film, Tommy Lee Wallace, did pretty well to make the longest book in the series to a nice 3-hour movie. With all that said, they also did a good job of choosing what to cut and what to keep, especially when it comes to cutting down the language stuff and all the violent stuff. They would also cut down some inappropriate stuff that wouldn't be necessary, that would pretty much make everybody really ungrateful. And yes, there is some language swearing in the miniseries, but because the miniseries is made for a TV movie, it's pretty much enjoyable for everyone, especially for many ages who might be young, and even some that could also be available for many older ones. Another thing that really bothered me was the way Henry Bowers was acting in this book. But let's go over on what makes you explain why you hate Henry. When the Bowers gang literally chased Mike all the way to the abandoned creepy house on Evil Street where they corner him in the fence, Henry reveals to him that he was the one that killed Mike's dog. I don't know if he said it for his reveal. He might have said it in front of him, and it even said that Mike was deeply emotional when he heard that. This goes wholeheartedly with the violence between Henry, which pretty much is different from their encounter in the miniseries, where I do find myself liking original version of their bully encounter rather than the book. In the miniseries, they only just stick to it, do a chase scene with them running. But here, Henry literally just goes out of character and just throws firecrackers at him. Because the book did show a good job of making it a description of showing that it would blow his feet off. And not only that, he also tends to throw firecrackers during the rock fight, which honestly made me mad at this point. And I know this is hard for Henry, but still, he literally is being abused by his own family. He was also worried that his dad would send him to summer school and literally would beat the crap out of him when literally he would take his frustration out on him if he does every little thing. When clearly Henry would literally take out his frustrations on his classmates, especially when it came to his rivalry with the losers. Now let's look at one scene in the miniseries versus the book. In the miniseries, I'm discussing the scene where Henry picks on Ben because of his weight, and after bullying him, Mrs. Douglas gives Henry a detention by sending him to the principal's office for 1 hour. This in turn makes Ben feel better and safe, and Mrs. Douglas warns the kids to be careful for their own safety, saying that they live in dangerous times because of the curfew. That was an amazing writing that was not in the book. Comparing the same scene in the book, Henry just did not get himself caught, however. He instead sits next to Ben while taking a test, and then he eventually tells him to let him copy, only for Ben to say no. Meaning if he does, both of them would get zeros on their tests. And it then gets to a dramatic cliffhanger with Henry telling Ben of his promise, saying,
You're dead, fat boy.
And it just cuts to the next scene where Ben meets Beverly. Miss Douglas could have easily just gave Henry a detention, the same thing like she did in the film. It just feels straight up cruel when it comes to this. And another thing I didn't like was Henry literally attacking and beating up Eddie Kazbrak. Henry was just doing what he was always doing. Always bullying the losers club and everything else that he always tends to do. But here, just like how I mentioned, Henry just goes out of character again and not just attack Eddie once, but attack him many, many times by stuffing gravel in his mouth. And he stuffed them in his mouth so hard that his gums started to bleed, including his teeth. Me personally, and it's fine if you disagree with me, everyone has their own opinions, but this is something that I never really enjoyed while reading this book. Why is it that this is what made Henry snap? And how the adults not putting a stop to his bullying is beyond me. Like Mrs. Douglas catching Henry, I can also see the store clerk saving Mike from Henry, which I actually praised in the miniseries version. And I feel like this would have been done the same way if the adults did it with him stopping Eddie. But in the book, Henry just pushes the man down and tells him to go back inside. And this pretty much goes to the influence that every adult are under the influence by it, as they could not help but just watch. And honestly just promotes bullying and violence on the way. And the last thing I'm really going to discuss while reading this book that bothered me the most is Patrick Hochstetter. In It Chapter 1, he was played by Owen Teague. And honestly, I think he did brought the character to life. And to be fair, he did good with this character in the films. But in the book, you just hate him. Probably a lot more than Henry. The only time we did see Patrick in the book, however, was when he joined Henry to attack Eddie. And this is also another thing that I really hated. And it was one of the main reasons why I was glad that they cut Patrick in the miniseries. There's a lot of bullying drama that I am personally not a fan of. They bully Eddie first, then they go to the junkyard where they literally ignite their farts, which only leads to Victor and Belch leaving, and it then leads to Patrick and Henry continue doing their fun, and even gets to the boiling point where Patrick offers Henry to give him a hand as he wants to give himself a hand, meaning he wants to have oral sex. This shocks Henry, and he then later punches him, saying he doesn't go for that. And I will actually agree with him at this point. Even though Henry said he didn't want to go for it, it also goes back to when he harassed Beverly. But anyways, it then leads to a fight between the two. Bowers eventually threatens to tell the cops about the refrigerator, where he literally keeps dead animals trashed in. And the one thing that really did make me stop reading was when Patrick literally killed his baby brother Avery out of jealousy. And again, that's just my opinion. Anyways, with every bad thing that I do cover up, I do enjoy this book, but not overall as I used to. But there are 3 good things about it. As I mentioned earlier in the video, Henry goes after Eddie Kazbrak as revenge for the rock fight. And during this fight, Henry breaks Eddie's arm, and this leads to Eddie making a donkey-like laughter. Henry replied saying, "You think this is funny?" And it shows that Henry sounded scared, which I felt was a great thing that they had to add because Henry, like it, seems to be affected by their laughter. And I think it's pretty clear that both of these two evil characters share the same weaknesses, as both of them need to take advantages of their victims being afraid. So having Henry being scared, it was a really great addition to give him payback. I also love how Bill was able to use one of the most iconic phase line in this book. He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghost. This to me felt like it was a perfect development for Bill, as he was able to use that to overcome his stutter and defeat Pennywise once and for all. And another thing that I found really interesting, but also a little bit surprising, was that Beverly, one of the members of the Losers Club, did of course had to marry Tom Rogan, because it was pretty crucial because she had to marry someone that is someone a lot like her father. And it's pretty much the same parallel for Bill, as he married Audra that looked a lot like her. So it's pretty clear that both of these two really did have the same thing, but instead, they just had to let Beverly end up with Ben, side by side with Bill and Audra. In conclusion, this book is pretty enjoyable, but that being said though, it's my least favorite Stephen King book. Even though I never read any of them, I still managed to go over each of the whole story. But that being said though, hopefully I did shed some light on what makes the book a very enjoyable part that I really did like.